President Ibrahim Traoré stepped through the carved teak doors of Kosiam Palace and an expectant hush fell over the hall. Rows of ministers, chiefs, imams, and journalists rose instinctively, unsettled by the sight of their head of state dressed not in a Western suit but in his crisp, sand-colored fatigues, the uniform of a frontline captain. At his back, the green-red-gold flag seemed to pulse beneath the floodlights, its lone star throwing a silent challenge to anyone who would doubt Burkina Faso's sovereignty. Traoré paused at the rostrum, breathing in the air thick with sweat, camera flashes, and whispered speculation. When he finally spoke, his baritone wavered, just for a heartbeat, before settling into the steady cadence the nation had come to trust. "I speak to you today," he began, "not as your president, but as Ibrahim, the son of Bobo Dioulasso who once dozed beneath a baobab while elders recited the epics of Ibrahim Traoré." He described parents who could not read yet insisted their children memorize proverbs about honor, and drought-scarred fields where boys learned that service, not possession, defines a man. With measured grace he unfolded a single sheet of stationery. The microphones caught the faint sigh of paper, the audience leaned forward as though the note itself were a sacred relic. Traoré's eyes, equal parts steel and sorrow, swept the hall. He recalled mornings saluting recruits at dawn, afternoons stooping to greet market women, nights consoling soldiers who had buried friends in Sahelian dust. Every line in this letter, he promised, is written with the ink of those memories. In that instant he ceased to be merely a commander-in-chief, he became an everyman griot channeling the collective heartbeat of a restless, resilient nation. The president's introduction flowed seamlessly into a stark confession of the battlefield that had shaped him. He spoke of dawn patrols along the Kamanjari, ambushes outside Djibo, and the unbearable task of writing letters to mothers whose sons would never again see the millet harvest. Each memory, he said, hardened his resolve to prize dignity over comfort. Then, without warning, Traoré uttered the sentence that would ricochet from Ouagadougou to the last settlement on the Niger border: "I will soon follow a path that leads beyond our frontiers." The words detonated like artillery. A rippling gasp traveled the parquet floor, some ministers half rose, unsure whether to protest or pledge allegiance. Outside, thousands jammed into Revolution Square stared at giant screens, their cheers of welcome freezing in mid-air. Yet Traoré did not flinch. "I owe you the full truth," he continued. "My departure will be condemned by foreign analysts who have never tasted harmattan dust, who speak of Burkina as a chess piece instead of a living soul. So hear it from my own mouth before rumor corrupts it." He reminded the gathering of the night he assumed power, how jihadist columns encircled Dori, how cash transfers from abroad were suspended within hours, how talk show pundits predicted the state would implode by Christmas. 5 seasons later, he declared, the red gold flag still flies over every mairie from Banfora to Gorum. Diplomats who once issued lectures now requested audiences, multinationals that had bled the nation for decades suddenly arrived with face-saving offers. What changed, he asked, then answered himself: we stopped asking permission to be free. Yet that very defiance, he admitted, had erected invisible walls around the presidency. Travel bans, blocked loans, covert arms embargoes, each sanction narrowed the corridors through which he could maneuver. "If I remain in this chair," he said, tapping the gilt crest of the rostrum, "I become a lighthouse hemmed in by its own beacon. To fight for our sovereignty, I must step outside the lighthouse and chart the reefs from open water." The analogy landed. Faces once frozen in shock now reflected dawning comprehension. Traoré emphasized he was not relinquishing identity, rather, he sought a vantage from which to wage political guerrilla warfare on behalf of the Sahel. "I take with me no palace, no motorcade, only the convictions hammered into me by widows of fallen conscripts and children who study by kerosene lamp." His voice, though firm, softened at the edges, revealing the ache of someone forced to abandon familiar trenches for a new and uncertain theater. But the resolve underneath was unmistakable: this was a tactical withdrawal in service of a broader offensive for dignity. Silence once again blanketed the hall as Traoré confronted the suspicion now flickering in restless eyes. "Do not confuse distance with desertion," he said, letting every syllable reverberate off marble columns. My bloodline, my bones, my very breath are stitched to this land. The day they bury me, it will be beneath Faso's red earth, not in a manicured cemetery abroad. He pivoted to the calculus that led him here. Since assuming office, every strategic pivot, expanding local arms manufacture, taxing unrefined gold, inviting non-aligned partners, triggered reactionary shockwaves from capitals that still viewed Africa through extractive lenses. The presidency, he explained, had become a fortress under siege by invisible artillery, credit rating downgrades, cyber disinformation, conditional aid packages designed to boomerang. Inside these walls, he noted, I can parry each blow, but I cannot outflank the artillery. Outside, I can choose the battlefield. Traore then outlined the moral geometry of leadership. A commander, he said, sometimes sends a unit around the hill while he holds the pass, other times he rides out alone to negotiate safe passage for those trapped behind enemy lines. This hour, he declared, demands the second maneuver. He vowed to forge alliances that would treat Burkina not as a client but as an equal shareholder in continental destiny. The old corridors of influence are narrow by design, he observed. Our mission is to blast new doorways. Yet he acknowledged the cost. Stepping down meant relinquishing ceremonial authority, the daily salute of honor guards, the ability to sign decrees with a stroke of the pen. It also meant exposing himself to misinterpretation. Critics would label him a deserter, opportunist, even a puppet of shadow financiers. I accept the slander, he said, because I have tasted something sweeter than reputation, freedom born of self-respect. His glance swept toward the balcony where student leaders stood clutching notebooks. Seeing them, his features softened. You are the custodians of this respect, he told them. Do not barter it for scholarships that chain your minds or internships that numb your conscience. Finally, he reassured the assembly that transitional mechanisms were already in motion. Teams of auditors, engineers, and agronomists, none chosen for party color, only for competence, had drafted a 24-month resilience roadmap. Parliament would vet the plan in open session, village councils would receive copies in More, Fulfulde, and Dayala. In this republic, Traore concluded, legitimacy flows upward from the hamlet, not downward from the palace. The statement drew nods even from opposition figures. Skepticism remained, but a seed of guarded optimism had been planted. English original. As the room absorbed his words, the light from outside shifted, casting a warm glow over Traore's face. It was almost as if the room, once filled with tension, had shifted its weight toward clarity, drawing everyone closer to the realization of the decision at hand. Traore continued, now more resolute, the gravity of his next words carrying the weight of history. He spoke about the journey that led him to this point, the political isolation Burkina Faso had endured since the decision to chart its own course, to no longer dance to the rhythms of foreign masters. He reminded the room of the days when his country's resources were extracted without regard for the people who lived on them, when international creditors imposed loans that crippled his people's future. Those who used to control us from afar have never known the suffering of a mother carrying water on her back, or a child running through a schoolyard that has no roof, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. The West's so-called help has always been about control, not charity. We've been sold economic schemes that enrich the few, leaving the rest to fend for themselves. When we decided to no longer ask for crumbs but to stand up for ourselves, they responded by tightening the noose. But even the tightest rope can't stop the spirit of a free nation. His words reverberated through the room, sparking a quiet murmur of approval. Then he spoke about the importance of education, a theme that had long been close to his heart. Traore's government had already initiated a quiet revolution in Burkina Faso's educational sector, investing in schools in rural areas, building new vocational training centers, and providing scholarships to children from impoverished backgrounds. The future belongs to those who invest in their youth, he stated, a conviction in his tone. We are not the world's beggars. We are the architects of our own destiny, and that future will be shaped by educated minds, not by the whims of foreign powers. His eyes swept the room once again, taking in the faces of ministers, military officers, journalists, and the few young students who were present. Many were still processing the shock of his earlier statements, but now there was an undeniable sense of recognition, of understanding. His vision wasn't just about stepping aside, it was about creating a stronger, more independent Burkina Faso, one that could stand on its own in the global arena. He elaborated on his plans for the next phase, noting the development of a new African International Council, a coalition of nations from across the continent that would focus on securing food, energy, and economic independence for Africa. This is not just about Burkina Faso, he stressed. This is about all of Africa. If we are to prosper, we must stand together, and if we must face the world's powers, we will face them as one. As he spoke about this new mission, his tone grew even more passionate. He reminded everyone in the room that despite the setbacks, the country had made great strides. He spoke of the strategic partnerships Burkina Faso had formed with countries across Africa and beyond, countries that no longer viewed Burkina Faso as a minor player in international politics but as an emerging leader in its own right. We have faced adversity, but we have overcome, he said, his eyes shining with pride. Now, we have to turn our gaze to the future and ask, where do we want to be in 10 years? Traoré's message was clear. Burkina Faso was no longer willing to be a passive recipient of international aid or an underdog in world politics. The future would be shaped by its people, not dictated by foreign powers. His mission to step aside from the presidency was not an escape but a strategic move to create more space for the nation to grow, to build relationships that would benefit Burkina Faso, and to open doors that had long been closed. He concluded by turning once again to the people of Burkina Faso, his voice softening but still full of conviction. I leave today not because I am running away, but because I am taking up a greater responsibility. My heart, my soul, will never leave this land. I am a son of this country, and until my last breath, I will fight for it. As the final words left his lips, the room fell into a heavy silence. But this time, it was a silence filled with hope. The mood had shifted, what had begun as a moment of shock and confusion had now evolved into a shared understanding. The transition from shock to understanding continued as Traoré's words echoed through the palace. His speech had touched a chord with many, particularly the younger members of the audience, who had grown up amid the turmoil and who now felt the weight of his vision for their future. The weight of his final decision was still sinking in, but it was clear, this was not a simple resignation. This was a calculated step forward, a step that would allow him to wield more influence and power on the international stage for the benefit of his country and continent. A sense of reverence had filled the hall, as Traoré took a moment to reflect on the journey he had undertaken with the people of Burkina Faso. The years of hardship, the constant battles against terrorism, the political and economic isolation, they had all led to this moment of reckoning. But he was not discouraged, rather, he was more determined than ever to protect the nation he loved so deeply. I know many will criticize me, he said, looking out across the room with piercing eyes. They will say I have abandoned my post, that I am running from my duty. But those who say such things do not know the heart of this nation. They do not understand the sacrifices that have been made to bring us to this point. They have not lived the life we have lived, they have not faced the same struggles. This decision, though difficult, is the right one. He paused, taking in a deep breath as the room held its collective breath, awaiting the next words to fall from his lips. I do not seek glory or fame. I never have, he continued. I seek only to serve the people of Burkina Faso and to ensure that we can chart our own course, free from the control of foreign powers. Traoré then shared his plans for the future of Burkina Faso, describing how he would work with international partners to bring development and security to the Sahel region. The challenges we face are great, but they are not insurmountable, he said. We must work together as one people, united by the cause of independence and self-determination. He spoke about the strategic importance of alliances with other African nations, alliances that would allow Burkina Faso to break free from the constraints of traditional power structures. We must no longer be dependent on the whims of foreign powers who do not have our best interests at heart, he stated. It is time for us to stand tall, as equals on the world stage. Traore emphasized the need for education and infrastructure development to ensure the future of Burkina Faso. He spoke about the importance of creating a nation where the next generation would have access to the tools they needed to succeed, tools that would allow them to build a future based on their own vision and not on the dictates of foreign interests. The future of our country, he said, lies in the hands of our youth. They are the ones who will carry forward the dream of a free and prosperous Burkina Faso. It is up to us to provide them with the opportunities they deserve. It is up to us to make sure they have the education, the resources, and the support they need to thrive. As he spoke, the room grew quieter, the weight of his words sinking in. Ministers and military officers exchanged looks, and the journalists in the back of the room scribbled furiously in their notebooks. This was a moment of history, a moment that would shape the future of Burkina Faso and the Sahel region for years to come. As the speeches continued, the room grew even quieter, the weight of the words hanging in the air, thick with history and the knowledge that a significant shift was taking place. Traoré's conviction was palpable, his vision for Burkina Faso clear. This was not a retreat but a calculated move to propel the country forward. His decision, while momentous, was also grounded in the reality of the circumstances facing the country. He continued, detailing the steps that would follow this speech, which would serve as the foundation for the country's future. The country's next steps, he assured the room, had already been planned in great detail. A comprehensive roadmap had been developed, focusing on education, economic independence, and infrastructure, to ensure that Burkina Faso could thrive in a global environment increasingly hostile to independent nations. He spoke about the creation of a transition government, a government that would be led by competent and honest individuals, free from political entanglements. Many of you in this room have served with me in one capacity or another, he said, his voice deep and serious. You know the weight of the decisions we have made together, and you know the sacrifices that we have made. But the future requires more than just good intentions. It requires action. He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, as ministers and military officers exchanged uneasy glances, processing what they had just heard. No one had expected this speech to evolve into such a sweeping vision for the country's future. Education, infrastructure, and empowerment are the pillars upon which we will build the next chapter of Burkina Faso's history, Traoré continued. We must invest in our children, we must build a future where they can succeed, where they will have the tools to shape their own destiny. And we must do so in a way that does not rely on the charity of others but on the strength of our own people. The President spoke of the importance of teaching the values of dignity, self-respect, and self-reliance to the next generation. We must teach our youth that they are the ones who will shape the future of our country, not foreign powers, not the dictates of others. It is up to them to carry the flame of independence and to protect the future of Burkina Faso. He also spoke about the importance of economic independence. Burkina Faso, he stated, could no longer afford to be at the mercy of international creditors or dependent on foreign aid. The country must chart its own path, seeking out new partnerships that would benefit the people of Burkina Faso and not just foreign interests. He was adamant that this move would not only benefit his country but would serve as a model for other nations in the Sahel and across Africa, showing that it was possible to stand up to the forces that had traditionally held Africa in a subordinate position in the global order. Traoré then turned his attention to the issue of security. The threats that Burkina Faso had faced from terrorism, insurgency, and external destabilization had been real and ongoing. Yet, despite these threats, he was proud of the resilience shown by the military, the citizens, and the government in defending their country. We have fought back, and we will continue to fight, he affirmed. We will not let the forces of darkness rob us of our sovereignty. Our people have paid a heavy price for the peace we now enjoy, and we must honor that sacrifice by continuing to protect the future of Burkina Faso. His words were no longer just those of a leader, they were those of a patriot, a father, a man who had seen the harshest realities of life and had come to understand the cost of freedom. His commitment to the people of Burkina Faso was not just political, it was deeply personal. He spoke about the sacrifices that had been made by the military, the citizens, the children, and the workers who had contributed to the struggle for Burkina Faso's independence and dignity. "I am proud of what we have accomplished together," he said. "But the struggle is not over. It will never be over as long as there are forces outside our borders that wish to undermine our sovereignty." As he spoke, the room began to change again. The tension that had gripped it earlier had softened. Ministers, once uncertain and confused, now seemed to grasp the gravity of his words. A sense of resolve began to take hold in the room. They understood now that Traore was not just stepping aside, he was stepping forward, creating a new kind of leadership, one that was rooted in the values of dignity, independence, and self-reliance. In closing, Traore reaffirmed his commitment to the future of Burkina Faso. "This is not the end of our story. It is the beginning of a new chapter," he said. "We are not just creating a new government, we are creating a new way of life, one that values the strength of our people above all else." The speech was over, but the message had been delivered. Burkina Faso was about to enter a new era, one that would be defined not by the old powers, but by the will and the strength of its own people. The room fell silent once more, but this time, the silence was not filled with confusion or doubt. It was filled with a shared understanding and a quiet hope for the future. The final moments of the speech were spent reflecting on the broader implications of the decisions Traore had made and the impact they would have on Burkina Faso and the greater Sahel region. As he stood at the podium, his words took on a new weight, one that was imbued with both hope and caution. The future of Burkina Faso, and possibly the future of Africa, was now intertwined with the choices made in this room. He spoke about the partnerships that would be forged, both within Africa and with nations outside the continent, to secure food, energy, and economic independence for the people of Burkina Faso. "We will not be pawns in someone else's game," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "We will build our future together, with friends who respect us, not those who see us as a tool for their own gain." Traore also spoke about the role that youth would play in this new vision for the future. "You are the backbone of our country. You are the ones who will carry the torch of independence, the ones who will lead us forward," he said, his tone softening as he turned toward the students who were present in the room. "I have always believed in the potential of our young people, and I believe that, together, we can build a future that is truly our own." As the room began to stir, the reality of the moment sank in. The people of Burkina Faso, and those watching from across the Sahel, knew that this was not just a speech. It was a declaration of a new direction, a bold step forward for a country that had long been sidelined in global politics. The sacrifices of the past had been great, but they had not been in vain. With Traore's words, there was a renewed sense of purpose. This was a moment that would define not only the next phase of Burkina Faso's history but also the broader trajectory of Africa. The old ways of doing things were no longer enough. It was time for Africa to chart its own course, to take control of its own destiny. And as President Traore stepped down from the podium, the people of Burkina Faso, those who had struggled alongside him, those who had fought for a free and sovereign nation, could now see the path forward clearly.